The fourth part of our career chat series, which is really going to focus in on the interview side of things, which is such a big topic for an awful lot of people, and also for an awful lot of people to really progress now, and especially in a digital age. So really looking forward to getting started and walking through each of the key core topics around things, and we'll be going through an awful lot of different questions, queries, everything else that people may have. So more than happy you can take live questions. I see Vivek, thanks very much for the request there. What we can do as we move into that kind of question portion of things a bit further in the actual series itself, or sorry, in this particular chat, should I say, we'll be able to get you on live if you're more than happy to come on and ask a couple of questions around the interview that you're maybe struggling with or have found and want to get a bit more clarification on, etc. So really excited to be going through all the ins and outs around an interview. It's such an important topic. It's such a big area. Number one, getting an interview in this type of climate can be quite difficult for an awful lot of people. Two, when you get the interview, it's then how to obviously take that first step, get in a good, make sure that you give a good account of yourself, and ultimately progress to the second round, third round, and so on. So getting that first piece is such a fundamental aspect of it, and obviously the follow-on piece is then how to continually progress through this. So we're going to be talking about all of that this evening, around firstly getting the interview, building on all the stuff that we've talked about in terms of our cover letter series, or his first career chat around their CV. Obviously then we talked about cover letter. Last week or 2 weeks ago we spoke about LinkedIn, and this week now we're going to be speaking about very much focusing in on the full end-to-end process of interviews, what to look out for, what not, what to be aware of, what ultimately the interviewer is trying to get from the interview, and also the follow-on piece. Then we're going to be looking at our next career chat series in 2 weeks time. We're going to be focusing in on offer negotiation and how that really ties into the whole process of looking for a job and setting yourself up for success. So really excited to kick that off. We're going to be going into everything now in a moment, and really get started on things. Hope everyone's been enjoying the lovely weather. It's very, very warm. So you will see me reach for that glass of water quite regularly, I can imagine, throughout this. So thanks very much for joining. Some fresh faces on there, which is great to see. Some of our clients already joining as well. So good to have you guys on and showing some support for us. These series we've gotten a huge amount of engagement from these and some really good inquiries. At the end of this chat, I'll be talking about a bit more, but if anyone wants to avail of our offer of providing our full Ace the Interview guide, we'd be more than happy to share it as a thank you for showing your support and obviously joining our career chat this evening. So make sure to message us either during or after with your email address and contact details, so we can then follow up and obviously give you that guide itself. It will contain absolutely everything you need to understand the fundamentals of an interview process. Of course, there's a bit more to it naturally, which is why people avail of our coaching and everything else, but it will certainly give you some really core topics that we're going to talk about tonight. So it'll be a really good follow-on document to have. So make sure you ping across your contact information and we can follow up from there. We can also be more than happy to offer you a career consultation to help accelerate things. Our whole focus, and has been since the start of the pandemic, is helping people get back to work as soon as possible, and thankfully we've been able to do that in less than 6 weeks for the majority of our clients. And we continue to work with each and every one of them who maybe takes a small bit longer than that. So we offer as much support as we possibly can, and this is just another aspect of what we do. So we're going to kick off now, going into the interview side of things. So fundamentally what an interview is there for, and bringing it back, building on what we talked about in our LinkedIn chat, it is there to validate whether you have the right skill set, the right experience, but most importantly, are you the right culture fit? And that's a very difficult thing in today's day and age. And the reason why it's difficult is because, one, for the majority of companies now, they're still in a digital age, in the sense that all of their interview process is now happening digitally. The majority of their staff are working digitally or remotely. So building a culture or maintaining a culture is so difficult. And then that's one aspect of it. The second part of it is trying to then measure somebody against that culture that maybe was there pre-COVID is very, very difficult. And that is also a difficult scenario for you to really understand what they're looking for, how they're looking for, and everything else. So when we're looking at interview processes, there is fundamental piece we need to cover. We need to make sure that what they've outlined in the job description is key to the job itself, because an awful lot of job descriptions aren't actually aligned fully to the job itself. So we need to question certain areas on that. 2, we need to make sure that we map out so many different aspects of our experience, and make sure that we're highlighting our core fundamental skills. And as well as that is making sure we bring our personality across. And why that's so important to bring your own personality across is, in some cases it may not be a fit for that organization, and that's actually okay, because it's better to find out now than it is to find out after 3, 4, 5, 6 interview process, which is which some companies have that interview process. So what we'll see throughout an awful lot of organizations now is that they have increased or expanded the number of interviews you have to have before you get offered a job. And the problem behind that is, 1, the market's moving too quick for that really to keep up, so it makes things a bit more frustrating for the candidate. Number 2, it really can be an arduous process, a really full-on process, and that then becomes, if you find out at the end that you're not successful because you're not a full fit for the culture, then it becomes, very disheartening and everything else. So it's better to find out earlier in the process. So going back to our career chat series, if you haven't seen it yet, the first one of it was very much focused on our CV and bringing across our personality to rule us into as many processes as we possibly can to get as many interviews, but ultimately rule us out of the wrong processes for us, because it's bringing across our personality. So when we're doing that, it's the same in an interview process. It's really key to bring across our personality, make sure that we give a good account for ourselves. Of course, try to align ourselves to the culture, providing there is alignment. If there's not, and you find that out early, great. It saves you having to go through so many more steps and becoming frustrated by the process, or disheartened, or taking a knock to the confidence. So it's so much more effective to find these things out earlier than later. So really, just to recap that, they're looking to understand if you've got the right skills, the right experience, and are you the right fit for the business? And is this the right job for you? That's the other piece to it. Everything else around that, in terms of culture and is this the right job for you, are the most important things, because the skills, the experience can be gained, skills can be taught. Culture cannot be taught, because fundamentally you either are aligned to what the business is trying to achieve, both from its business aspirations and how it wants to achieve them, and also that has to be aligned with your own. If it's not, that's okay. There's other businesses out there. There's a perfect fit for you, so it's better not to waste time on it. So that's what an interview process is all about, is trying to find out and validate those areas. To do that, they've obviously got multiple different stages of it. So the first stage interview, a lot of the time, can be handled by a recruitment organization or talent acquisition, or HR a lot of the time, but more often talent acquisition and recruitment will handle this stage, which is essentially what's known as the screening stage. And the screening stage is very much just about them quickly validating, asking questions around your experience to date, your skill set, and trying to get a bit of an understanding about your personality. That's really what the first stage interview is always going to be about. So they're going to ask questions like, can you give me an insight into what you've been doing to date? Can you highlight the key experience you have that aligns to this role? Can you walk me through your experience and the aspects of it that you feel are relevant to this opportunity? All of these different ways of phrasing, but ultimately what they're asking you for is walk me through your experience and tell me exactly how the work you've done to date will help you succeed in this role. That's ultimately what they're trying to figure out. So when you're answering that question, it should be a very high level point of, I worked in these organizations, these are the key deliverables that I had, going back to what we talked about in our career chat series around their CV and making it delivery focused. These are the key deliverables that I had in that role, and this is why I am aligned to this opportunity. It also ties nicely back to our cover letter, because in our cover letter, a huge amount of what we're doing and what we're talking about is how we understand the job, what we understand the key skills of the job, and how we have utilized those skills previously in other roles, and therefore it will set you up for success in this job. So that's ultimately what you're trying to do. So one, we're trying to really validate they're trying to really validate your skills and experience. So we want to make sure we give a good account of that at the very outset. And then they're trying to understand you as a person, what you bring to the table, what makes you different to every other individual out there, how you can really add something new to the business while complementing what's already there. That's what they're trying to figure out. Will you add value to the culture? Will you add to the culture of the organization? Or is the culture not aligned to you? Is it not going to set you up for success? And that's a huge piece of the jigsaw. So when you get into that early stage screening, it becomes a bit less about the culture piece because it's typically a shorter interview. On average, you would have 15 to 30 minutes for that type of screening call. A lot of the time it is a call even prior to it being, or pre-COVID should we say, prior to us being in so much of a remote world. It would have been a 15 to 30 minute call. At the next stage then you're going to be really speaking with somebody. A lot of the time it could be HR, could be actually the hiring manager, so the person that you'd probably be working into. And a lot of the time that moves into more of a competency based interview. Now I'll talk about some of these areas in a bit more detail in a moment, but just to give you a high level point, a lot of the time when it comes to first, second, third, fourth, fifth round interviews, depending upon the organization, yes, they can go longer, and some organizations will do a full day worth of interviews just to walk you through 7 or 8 meetings and different stages. But ultimately, a lot of the time, what happens in every single interview is you're repeating a lot of the same information. So you're talking about what experience you have to date, what skills you've already gotten, how they apply to this job, and how you will be a good candidate for this opportunity, or how you would be able to come in and add value in a very quick time frame because of the experience you have already. So you're going to repeat that an awful lot of the time throughout the whole process, whether it's at the beginning of the interview, middle, or the end of it. A lot of the time those questions will come up. But ultimately the majority of that will be covered off in the first round, and then it'll be continually reiterated in smaller portions throughout the whole process. So it's really important that you put an awful lot of focus on your first round interview, understanding where you add value, what experience you have, what skill set you have, and how you can articulate that in a very short, concise manner that makes sense. So the benefit, that one thing I always get people to do is practice that. Someone asking you, can you walk me through your experience to date and how that relates to the job that we're interviewing for? And that way that you can start to get used to that piece. The second piece that we were talking about a moment ago was the competency side. So that's typically the second round. And a competency interview is very much focused on you working on an example-based scenarios. So a lot of the time they'll be asking you is the who's, the what's, the where's, the why's essentially. So when a competency-based interview comes along, it's very much, can you give me an example of a time when you did this? Or give me an example of a time when you went above and beyond for a colleague that didn't add value to you, or that you took time out of your own day to go and help somebody else because you could see they were in need. That's always team focused. There's also other questions that they'll ask about leadership. So how do you typically deal with setbacks, or how do you lift a team after you've had a setback? What steps do you typically take? Or they'll look at confrontation. How do you typically deal with that, or conflict at work? Give me an example of a time where you had a disagreement with somebody, and what steps did you take to diffuse the scenario? All of those they're all scenario-based questions, and there's multiple ones of them. But ultimately they break down in some key headings: teamwork, innovation, leadership, confrontation, and also very much focus on motivation around and your bounce back ability to a large degree. So they're the kind of core topics that they really want to understand, because ultimately if you look at what makes up a really good hire is, do they have leadership qualities that can benefit the business in the future? Are they going to work well with a team? Are they going to be innovative? Can they manage when things don't go their way and there is conflict, because naturally there's going to be disagreements, difference of opinions and everything else? And how do they bounce back from losses? So do they have the understanding that that's a natural part of the course to run into these problems and obviously come out the other side with more learnings and everything else? So that's a huge piece that they do look for. So when you get those questions, there's a very simple methodology. A lot of people will know it, I'm sure, but a lot of people don't use it that effectively. And again, when it comes back to whether it's your CV, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's cover letter, and most importantly interviews, doing the simple things very, very well is the most important thing. All of the other fancier stuff that you can do and be really well prepared, and we'll go into all of that sort of stuff, setting yourself up for success for an interview in a moment, really is about making sure that you do the simple things well. And the STAR methodology, there is nothing more simple. So STAR is simply an acronym that stands for situation, task, action and result. So when you're articulating your responses to give me the question, the competency based questions of give me an example of a time you did this or this happened or that happened, it's about highlighting what the situation was, what tasks you undertook to really pull apart the situation and make sure that you understand all aspects of it, then what actions you then took to resolve that or to improve it or to move things forward or to overcome the challenges, and then what was the end result? What benefit did it have to your teammates, to the organization and to you? So, or to, most importantly, to the clients. So that's what STAR is all about. It's about basically using a very simple sequence of events or highlighting your response in a very simplistic way in a sequence order of what happened, what tasks you undertook to make sure you corrected it or resolved it, what actions that came out of that to make sure that you could overcome the challenges, and what the end result was and the value that it brought to the organization. They're the fundamental aspects of it. So it's really important that people use the STAR methodology. If you haven't heard of it, brilliant, you've learned something very, very easy. If you have heard of it and maybe not used it or don't understand it, again, we'll be sending out a document afterwards to simply just share your contact information. We'd be more than happy to pass that on. It gives very good detail, very good examples in the whole document, and it's really focused around making things easy on you, because ultimately that's how an interviewer is programmed. If you think about an interviewer and the amount of interviews they have to do on a day-to-day basis, they will spot somebody very easily that doesn't give them simplistic, straightforward answers that covers all the bases. Whereas if you follow that simplistic format, it will make sure that you're covering all the bases. It helps you stay on track, which is very, very easy to go off track when you're in an interview setting and over talk. But when you're using the STAR methodology and you have that in the back of your head, constantly thinking about it, it makes it so much easier to give the overview, the tasks that were undertaken, the actions that then help to resolve the situation, and ultimately what the end result was for the client, the company, your team and yourself. And it really just helps enhance the whole process. It's obviously not the only thing you need to do in an interview, but from a competency-based interview, if you did that, if you're able to do that well and nothing else, you will 80 to 85% of the time you'll be successful in that. There's other pieces that you need to do. So before we jump into maybe some of the later rounds and give examples of what 3, 4 and 5 a lot of time can look like, what's really important to do before we do anything is our preparation. And preparation, it should be done obviously before we submit our CV, should be done before we send our cover letter and anything else. And before we walk into a room. There's nothing worse than when you call someone to ask them about their experience and everything else, and someone they say, oh, what companies have sent loads of applications, which basically just says to them that you haven't taken the time to really tailor your approach. Yes, you might be applying for lots of different jobs, but it's not the interviewers or the agents' job to remind you of the jobs you've applied for. That is your job and your job alone. So it's make sure that you know what jobs you're applying for, you've prepped yourself on the types of organizations you're going to work with, and you have simplistic questions that allow you to understand who that company is quite quickly. It's like, oh yeah, can you tell me a bit about the business and the role? You don't say, oh, what job is that? You can say, just tell me a bit about the business and the role. I do remember applying for it. I was really looking forward to hearing back from you. Can you tell me a bit more about the job? It gives you a very easy way to remember quickly about who the company is, what they're all about and everything else. And that will help set you up a bit more. But then once you progress through that stage, and that could be the screening call, the first stage, or that can just be an initial chat. Sometimes they're one of the same, sometimes they're separate. When you've done that, it's so important that you then spend, prior to having your first interview, you do understand the business, you understand the culture, you understand their values. If possible and you have enough time, I always recommend people to reach out to members of their team, and I'll explain why it has become an awful lot easier in a moment for this to come to fruition, or for it to be a very big impact and very big help for you. Is reach out to members of the team in the organization you're going to be interviewing in, specifically members of the team that you might be working alongside in the future, because they will be able to give you good insight. Now, while it will be slightly slanted, they will give you a good understanding of the business, what their role is, and what the day-to-day looks like. The reason why that's become so easy now to get that information, whereas 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, was very, very difficult, is the amount of money organizations are pumping in to really highlight themselves as a good employer, to really push out the culture of the organization, and especially now in a digital world, it has never become more important for people to be able to engage online and share what's great about the business. And so what organizations are doing is doing huge amounts of internal PR, for want of better phrasing, on how good the organization is, what they're doing, how they're doing it, how they're trying to stay connected, how they're trying to support all their staff and everything else. Because one, they want obviously all their staff to stay supported, stay engaged, and ultimately retain them, because we are starting to see the opportunities go through the roof again, which is great, but that also means that people will move an awful lot more, and especially when you feel a bit less connected to an organization, you might be more inclined to move now. So what's really important for them is they're doing all of this internal PR, and one of the big things they're talking about is how they want to project that message out into the market, and they're encouraging their staff to engage with people that want to learn about the business, whether it's their friends, colleagues, or just someone on LinkedIn that wants to learn about the business and what the day-to-day looks like, so they can get that message out there a bit better. And they're getting everyone bought into this whole concept. So if you reach out to somebody in a team, in an organization that you really want to work with, the likelihood is, if the organization is a company you do want to work with that really encourages and wants people to stay connected and wants to invest in their talent, they will respond. And it's a really big indicator if it's a type of business. If you're looking for future growth, you're looking for to be supported, you want to really grow with the business and everything else, if they don't respond, and I wouldn't just based on one person, of course, try and contact a couple, but if they don't respond within a week or anything else, I would say it maybe not is the organization you want to look for or work with, because it's unlikely that the team might not be responding because they might not have anything good to say, or B, it's not something they're really investing in and not really talking to the team about. And either way, it's not a good indicator as to how well that organization is set up. So it's such an important piece, and something we talk to our corporate clients about all the time, on how we really want them to encourage their staff to make sure that they are pushing out the internal PR, making sure that their team are connected, they're really engaged, and that they're getting they're using the full wealth of the audience that they have in terms of the ambassadors in the business. So all their staff should be ambassadors of the brand, and that's really what so many big organizations are doing, even small to medium sized organizations are doing now. So it's such an important piece. So the preparation not only now should include just looking at the business's website, understanding their values, making sure you know the job description like the back of your hand and how your skills relate to it. You should also be reaching out to people in the business to talk to them about what their day-to-day looks like. So you understand the role fundamentally to make sure that you are happy with what those activities will look like, and that you can comfortably, once you've got the right training and everything else, that you can comfortably do those activities on a day-to-day basis, and ultimately can see yourself progressing with that business. That's the preparation side. Once you've done the preparation, you're in the interview. Like we said, sometimes you'll have a screening call, which could be, the first interview in some organizations. In other organizations, it may not be. If you've had a screening call and then you have a first round interview, a lot of the time the first round interview will echo what happened in the screening call, so talking very much about your skill set, experience, and then also around you as an individual, how you act in work, what you look for in a good organization, and also questions that you'll have. And I'll go into what good questions look like in a moment. That's the first area. So it will echo what you've already talked about in the screening call with maybe the recruiter, if they're an external company, or the talent acquisition person if they're part of the internal team. Then you'll be progressed on to, providing that's successful, you'll then be progressed on to a hiring manager, which will be the competency round. So the person you might be working into, and then that will very much focus on, like we talked about a little while ago, around the key competency questions. So around leadership, motivation, teamwork, as well as innovation and dealing with conflict, of course, and also bounce back ability, those kind of core areas. And really that'll be give me an example of a time this happened or that happened or you did this, etc. And you use the STAR methodology there, as we were talking about. So at that stage, once you've passed through those markers, a lot of the time there will be a third round interview. The third round interview, for the most part in small to medium organizations, will be a sense check. And the sense check will typically be someone more senior in the business who will want to recap some of the course stuff. So again, going back to this experience, back to the skill set, and then obviously just have a chat with you in general, just to see what type of person you are. and that you're a good fit. But a lot of the time they don't progress many to that stage in those size organizations, because there's only, when you're at that stage, typically you're about to get an offer. They just want to do a quick sense check because someone in the organization more senior just wants to be involved, or they want to have, you know, a bit more validation before they make the offer, which is a great place to be. And an awful lot of businesses are working out like that. It's a very slick process. It's something that we talk to companies about all the time, because it actually helps expedite things a bit quicker. It means that you're not, if you find great talent, which there's so much of it out there right now, that you're not waiting around, because ultimately it's going to be snapped up very, very quickly, because the market has come back in a very big way. Secondly, then, for a third round interview, it could also go a different route, which will be will be very much a presentation focus. And what that will typically consist of is what you might look like in the role. So what would your first 90 days be in an organization? How would that look? What would you bring to the table? What would you do for the first 90 days of the business, within the business? Now, a lot of the time that's typically kept for team lead, management, leadership roles. A lot of the time, some people do it anyway early on because that's how they want to set up their organization, and that's fine. Every organization, of course, will be different. But if you have that scenario, really what they're looking for is, how are you going to start delivering on things in the first 90 days? Realistically, in the first 90 days, you're still learning. And ultimately, that should be a fundamental piece of it. So you're looking, in the first 30 days is trying to understand the business, getting your onboarding training, understanding who's who in the business, who you should be talking to, getting a good grasp of all of your responsibilities and what you're going to be delivering on. Then actually it's implementing that, tweaking the process, and of course then into the third month, typically you should start to see some results or some progression, or really starting to add value to the business, depending on the type of role you're in, whether that's operations, whether that's sales, marketing, accounts, etc. You should start to be able to really start to pick things up. Now, during that period, you'll have started to take over pieces, and they're starting to be looking at how you've delivered against those objectives throughout that period. But they won't be, a lot of the time, won't be expecting huge things very, very quickly. Some organizations can, of course. It depends upon the type of role, but for the most part, they're not. So when you get that type of scenario, there is a lot of detail, there is a lot of work to do in it. So if you're in that scenario right now and you don't know what to do or how to go about it, please reach out. We'd be more than happy to go through it in more detail. In bigger organizations, the presentation is a third stage, but there might be 4 or 5 more might be 4 or 5 altogether interviews in general. So the presentation might be at that point, or what could happen from a full end-to-end process. If we take, let's say, some of the more multinational corporations, what you could be looking at is a screening call, then an interview, first round interview process that focuses on your skills, experience, and your culture fit. Then you'll have a second round with a panel of individuals. So you'll have one panel which will be focused on maybe your hiring manager and 2 others from other departments that will help gauge your answers to different things, and that will be a blend between your first round and a competency-based interview. You then might have a further panel of interviewers at the, let's say, the 4th round, or the 3rd round, should I say, to be more accurate. Then you might have a presentation at the 4th round, and then the 5th round will be meeting somebody quite senior in the organization. Now, sometimes if you're going into, let's say, a sales role or something along those lines, or going into one of those multinational corporations and doing, let's say, a sales development role, rather than a presentation, what you will really have is a demonstration. And the demonstration might be you actually doing a call to somebody to see how you deal with the actual job itself, and basically showing if you're capable of managing that on a day-to-day basis. So there is those nuances that are naturally going to change from role to role, but ultimately, for the most part, what you should expect from an interview process is at least 3 stages. Screening call and first round interview, sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're split out. You'll definitely have a second round, providing you progress into a competency level, so there'll always be that stage. And then you'll also have a final sign-off piece. Now, some people will move after the 2nd stage, or some people might move after the 3rd stage, or they might want to further follow. That it's, you know, each process will evolve on its own, but typically you'll have 3 core stages. So you'll have the screening piece, the first round very much focused on skills, experience, and suitability or culture fit, and then the competency-based interview. So how would you react in certain scenarios, and what can they expect from you on a day-to-day basis? Sometimes you'll then have the overlay of, obviously, like we said, the presentation, or if you're going for more of the multinational corporations, you might have psychometric testing thrown in, you might have multiple other things kind of coming up. So it's really, really important to be aware of what the interview process is, and to get that full insight. Again, it comes back to that preparation piece. So as soon as you have a screening call from anyone, going back and just really highlighting the importance, it is so important, and we hear it on a daily basis when we're talking to clients, and it's one of the questions we ask all the time: how do you answer the phone when a recruiter or a talent acquisition person calls you and says, thanks very much for your application, we'd love to obviously progress you to an interview, or we'd love to chat to you a bit more about your skills and experience. 9 times out of 10 people will say, oh, I asked them what role is it because I've applied to so many. It is the worst thing you can actually say, and probably 90% of people say it, because what it tells the person straight away is that you are applying to so many different roles, you don't know what you're applying for, so really haven't given it any thought, and really it's just spray and pray, for example. So it's more about being targeted, and if you are unaware or you have applied for loads of roles, I completely understand. What you can do there to make sure that you navigate that properly is say, yeah, listen, I really appreciate the call. I was actually really hoping I got a call from you guys. Could you tell me, I'm really eager to understand the role in a bit more detail. Can you give me a bit more insight on it? So it puts you very much on the front foot. It allows them to then explain the role to you in more detail. So it gives you a moment to pause and think about how you can then respond and explain how you are a suitable candidate for that role and how you'd love to progress. So it puts you in a really strong position and does set you up for success. So it's so important to do that. It's a really fundamental piece. Once you've done that, then your interview preparation is key. Understanding the business, reviewing the website, understanding their values, making sure that they're aligned with your own, trying to understand the business vision, mission, and everything else. And on the screening call that you have, make sure you know at the very outset how many interview stages there is, what they are, how long they're for, and who they're with. You won't obviously get to maybe the people because they might change depending on who's available, but you'll get the types of people that will be on the interviews, so you'll know what type of audience you'll be speaking to. When you have that information, it allows you to understand the follow-on steps that will be happening, and allows you to envision it in more detail, which therefore allows you to prepare in a better way. Once you've also done that, you then want to start reaching out to people in the business, in the team that you're looking to apply to work within, to understand what their day-to-day looks like, how their roles work, what they like about the business, how they're finding working remotely, etc., etc. And like I said earlier on, companies are investing millions, certainly in the larger ones. Obviously, the more smaller ones are investing a huge amount of time and effort and, of course, money to really do that internal PR, make sure people are comfortable, feel connected still, even though they are working remotely, feel supported, and that they are making all of their staff ambassadors of the brand, because as they need to return to normal and start scaling again and building up the talent in the business, they need all of their staff singing from the same hymn sheet, talking about the same messaging that is core to the business and how it wants to be articulated in the market. And make sure that when someone contacts them on LinkedIn or anything else, that they are responding and giving a good account of the business, because that's going to attract more talent. And a huge amount of companies are really putting a huge amount of focus now on their employer brand, not just about their business brand and how they go about winning new business and driving revenue and everything else, but their employer brand, because by getting their employer brand right, they'll get the right talent. By getting the right talent, they'll be able to build the right business. And by building the right business, they'll be able to build the right level of revenue. And that's the whole focus for organizations now. So it's so important. And all of that does start with how the business is articulated from every single part of the organization. It doesn't matter whether you're in sales, operations, utilities, accounts, whether you're on the C-suite, doesn't matter. The message should be the same for any good organization. So it's a really good indicator if you're getting good feedback, good insight, and people are responding and talking about the business and the day-to-day that they do. If you're not, it can be an indicator of two things. One, the business, they don't have anything good to say, or two, they don't see it as a valuable piece, a valuable part of their day, and therefore, again, it tells you something about the people that you'll be working with. So really good indicators. Then we've obviously got the follow-on stage, like we talked about in terms of the different interviews. So more than happy if people want to start throwing questions in as to what they'd like to know about interviews and how it all works. Also, in the meantime, we've had naturally some questions come in prior to from different individuals, as well as obviously questions that we field on a day-to-day basis. So one, should you get feedback from people after an interview? Absolutely. If you're not getting feedback, it's very, very poor performance on their behalf. That's from a client and an agency, because ultimately you've taken the time to interview, you've invested time, they've invested time. So at the very, very least you can expect is not just to get a no or a yes or a progressing to the next stage or nothing. It should be detailed of, no, we're not progressing because we found there was other candidates with more suitable experience in this area. That's fine. That gives you a good indicator as to why you missed out and everything else. That's perfect feedback because it gives you something to work with. But not getting anything is not good enough. Just getting a no, that we're not progressing you at this stage, it's better than nothing, but it's not good enough. So it's so important, and it's okay to ask. You don't have to apologize for asking. And a lot of people do, or they feel they shouldn't ask, whatever it may be. Consistently follow up with everyone. If they haven't given you feedback, they should be, and they should be feeling that they should, number one, in terms of without you having to do that. Number two, it's really important to understand. And also, a lot of the time, by following up, and it's something we talked about on our last career chat as well, by following up, a lot of the time roles can go on pause, things get moved around, priorities get reorganized in organizations, and sometimes that role gets put on hold, but they don't advertise that out to the market. By following up, a lot of the time you will be pulled back into the process, whereas others may have fallen off. And what I mean by that is, when you're continually following up, they might have paused the process, other candidates have gone elsewhere, gotten other jobs, or lost interest, whatever it may be, but because of you followed up a couple of times, you've shown interest, you've shown good engagement, you've shown your ability to your resilience more than anything, I guess, and also that you're really interested in the opportunity. And when that role does come back on, which does happen quite a lot of the time, they will consider you part of the process. Or a lot of time we've had candidates before who have actually just been hired straight away, and we did mention that on our last career chat as well. So it's follow up is so important after every interview, not just to get feedback, but to follow up and say, listen, it was great to meet you, I really enjoyed it, I really feel it's a great role for me, and reiterate why you feel it's a great role for you and how you can add value. And then if you don't hear back in a week, follow up and say, listen, I really enjoyed the chat, we'd love to just get some initial feedback on what maybe the next steps are. You don't hear back in another week, follow up again. We've really enjoyed it, of other opportunities coming up. I really just want to understand where things are at, because this is one of my top choices, but I really want to just understand what the next steps are, or if I'm no longer in the running for the role. And a lot of the time they will come back and give you a yay or nay, especially if they're interested. They will come back and say, actually, we are quite interested. So do keep us, the next stage, we're just trying to organise people because of holidays, whatever, especially in this type of season right now. So really, really important. Good question there. What should I be asking the interviewer at the end of the interview? Never sure if my questions add value. Great question. I did say I'll come back to it later on. So good prompt as well. So in terms of good questions, really what you need to understand is the culture of the business, how things have been impacted by COVID. So what the biggest challenge has come in for the team in staying connected, and how everyone's finding the virtual events. They're really good questions to ask to understand, because that's giving you a good insight into the business and how they go about trying to keep everybody connected. So that's really important to ask. Follow on things like what progressional opportunities come with the role, what type of how much development comes in the organization. So in terms of the follow-on developments or continuous development. So of course you're going to have onboarding, of course you're going to be trained for the role, but ultimately what else should you be, what other training and development or I guess further education opportunities come with it as well. So always good questions to ask. Asking them what their favorite thing about working for the business is such an important one. One, because it shows that you're genuinely interested in why people work for the business. Two, it helps you get an understanding of the people that are interviewing you and what you should be looking out for. And three, it really gives you a good feel for how they respond, whether it's I just love coming to work every day and sort of stuff, or whether they really give you a genuine answer that's not that's choreographed or transcripted already. So it's a really good question. And then finally, I'm very much into always finishing and having a call to action or closing off things in the right way. I will always wrap up any interview process and encourage my clients to constantly do it the same. Is there anything that I've said or that would make you feel that I'm not the perfect candidate for the role? It can be a really strong question to ask. Other stuff would be, are there any other areas you want me to clarify further? Or as of right now, from what we've discussed, do you feel that I'd have the skills and experience to deliver on the role? Which is a bit of a softer approach to it, and works really nicely, because a lot of the time they'll say, if you spend 15 to 30 minutes with somebody, or slightly more in a lot of cases, a lot of the time they will say, yeah, I do feel you have the skills and experience, so actually what I'm going to do is progress you to the next stage. So really important to ask that type of question. Other stuff that we really need to look at is in terms of attire, which people ask about regularly, especially in a digital world. It was something that is asked about us all the time, and we see it all the time with clients, and they're constantly talking to us when people are arriving for interviews. They're maybe a bit more casual because they're working from home, which I get. Depending on the role, so how you would dress in the office for that role, and every role is different, because IT dress in a different way to, let's say, someone who is maybe very corporate focused, or working in very client facing and has to wear suits in the financial sector, or whatever it may be. Again, like myself, wearing a blazer or whatever it may be, that it differs from role to role. So whatever you would have worn in the office on a day-to-day basis is what you should, or what you would typically wear to a meeting for your role, is typically what you should be wearing, whether you're in a digital world or meeting them face to face. It's the exact same. So you should be following that same track. Background is really key. My background's not too bad, but could be a bit better maybe. So what I would say is background's a really key aspect. I mean, there's some colour, there's all that sort of stuff in the background, so it helps frame things a bit better. But your background when you're in a digital world is so important. If it looks messy or anything else, it doesn't give the right feel. So at the very least, have a blurred background. But what I would say is typically set yourself up for success in the right way, and have a nice background, something that you could maybe talk about, or that would highlight something, an insight into you. Like a lot of time I've done interviews, and I maybe have certain books on the shelf because there's certain areas that I want to highlight about myself when I'm talking to different organisations, and some of the fundamental things that we believe in our organisation, how we go about our business. What should I ask when they ask, tell me about yourself? I don't want to repeat what the CV says. Great question. So when they ask, tell me about yourself, it's not about your CV, your experience, your skill set. All of that is a really important piece, but it's not the only piece. And when they say, tell me about yourself, it's about you. So give them a good account of who you are from a work point of view, from a professional point of view, of who you are, what you bring to the table, what's your personality about when it comes to work. So are you really fast paced and really like to move up, like to have lots of like bite-sized chunks of information, or do you really like to get into the information, understand it all, pull it all apart, and then piece it all back together, which maybe you're a bit more reflective, which is great, and that's perfect for loads of different roles. There's no negative to either one, providing that you're aligning yourself to the right roles. And if you've more questions about how you know how to align yourself to the right role, it's a bit of a bigger question, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation, so please do share your contact information. We can definitely follow up with you afterwards to walk through that, because we do an awful lot of career reviews, and we'd happily do one for you to walk through and make sure that you're maybe working in the right type of industry for yourself, your skill set and everything else. So it's a really good question. When it comes to one of the big things, and it is very much related to this, one of the big questions is, and it's the most ineffectively answered question in any interview process, is explain what makes you different to every other candidate we're going to see. Tell me why you're the best candidate. Tell me why you're best aligned to this role, or you're the we should give you the job over the others, etc., etc. It's asked in so many different guises, but ultimately it's asking, why should we hire you? What makes you different to all the other candidates that's going to make us say, yes, we're going to hire you? And if we go back to our career chat series around their CV, which is our very first one, we talk about a professional profile. And a professional profile at the top of your CV is all about why you're different, what makes you different to every other candidate, because no candidate is the same. Unfortunately, everybody makes themselves look the same as others, because they only talk about their skill set, they talk about their experience, and they talk about some of their education. A lot of the time, that typically tends to be the blend. The problem is that if a lot of people can have the same education, they can have the same experience, they can have the same skill set, because a lot of the skills will be derived either from your experience or from your education. So the problem is that if that's the case, then there's nothing different between you. But really there is, and the difference is you're the difference. Your personality, how you articulate yourself, how you understand that information, and how you add value is completely different to someone with the same skill set, same experience, the same education will add value. And understanding that is very, very difficult. However, once you understand it, it will put you head and shoulders above every other candidate in the process. And 9 times out of 10, you will get the job. And the reason why you'll get the job is because you have a better understanding of you, what you bring to the table, and how they can validate how you can add value to the organization long term. It also shows your your emotional intelligence, not your intellectual side. It shows your emotional intelligence, which is as important, which is your EQ, is as important as your IQ, which is your intelligence side of things. So your emotional intelligence and understanding that is far more important to organizations than your skill set and experience. Because if you have a better understanding of you and what you bring, it will allow for greater growth an awful lot quicker, which will add more value to the business, which means you're a more worthwhile investment. In terms of being asked about salary in the first interview, and they haven't said it, let's say on the job description or online or whatever it may be, again, it comes back to preparation. One of the pieces we didn't talk about in preparation, because we were going to talk about it now anyway, was understanding what your salary expectation should be and how that's set out and where you are in the country. Whether you're in Dublin, whether you're in Cork, whether you're in Galway, or whether you're in the UK, whether you're north, south, east, west, it doesn't matter. You need to know what your salary expectations should be and how they align to that region. So very easy thing to do. There is hundreds, if not thousands, of recruiters in both Ireland and the UK. Each of them, or the majority of them, will push out salary reviews on an annual basis. You can download them from anywhere, and a lot of the time you could look at 2 of them and it'll give you a good base of, if you're looking for this role, your salary should be this in the city side, or the higher end, which is typically the city side, so it might be Dublin, might be London, etc. And then you have the regional rate. So if you're more regional based or based outside the city, etc., then that's typically the rate that you're looking for. In a digital world, it has become a bit less and there is a bit more play with it, but once you know what your expectation should be, it allows you to set it at the right level. You can also push it a bit further ahead. And that, a lot of the time, that's more for people stepping out into the career or changing career, because they might already be on a salary and they're looking for maybe a bump in salary or taking on more responsibility or wherever it may be. So really, really important, even for if you're looking to take the next step in your career and are on a current salary and are expecting, maybe a 10-15 grand increase, make sure it's realistic for the region that you're in, the role that you're in, and everything else. And you can do that very, very simply by looking at some of those salary guides, or again, we'd be more than happy to give some advice on that. Should we be asking about other benefits package in an earlier interview or at the final interview? It's a great question. What you can do, a lot of people, don't want to be just grabbing at benefits and everything else early on, and I fully understand that. What you can do, which is a really easy way of doing it, is what supports do you typically put in place for your staff? And a lot of time that kind of relates to educational, that relates to, whether it's to health benefits or certain compensation levels, whatever it is, on an annual basis. So a lot of the time it's just trying to understand what type of support framework they have in place is a nice easy way of putting it. But more so understanding, you can of course always ask it. There's no issue in asking what the typical setup is. Because most of the time in the earlier stages, specifically in the screening call, they will ask your benefits anyway. So what salary are you on, what benefits do you have, and that gives you the perfect opportunity, the perfect time to really ask about that for this particular role. So you can assess early on whether it's worth your while and continuing in the process. And it's something we are going to talk about in more detail on our offer negotiation, which brings everything back to how you build up your getting the right offer at the end of a process, but how you build that up through the whole process without having to just negotiate it at the end. How long would you expect to wait to hear back after an interview? You should hear back within a couple of days, realistically. A week is fair enough, but also at the end of an interview, and it's a really good point, at the end of an interview you should ask. So once you've asked, and going back to the thing we've had earlier on about, is there anything else, or based on the discussion, do you think I have the skill set and experience? When they say yes, great, when can I expect to hear from you on the next steps? a lot of the time they'll say, we'll be back to you within a week, we'll be back to you within 3 days, whatever it may be. But it's good to get that indication. So, because if it's going to be a week or 2 weeks, because a lot of time they'll tell you we've another 2 weeks of interviews, and then we're going to take a couple of days to reflect. So it's going to be probably 2.5 to 3 weeks before you hear back from us. At least you're not waiting by the phone or thinking you've lost the opportunity, or haven't progressed, etc. When actually it's 3 weeks, then you're going to hear back. So it's always good to ask. So it's a great question. What's the most difficult question you've ever been asked yourself? Great question. A lot of the time, I think probably the biggest question that was probably the toughest one for me was who inspired me most personally, because it's something I haven't been asked in a job interview, and that was very, very probably throwing, I would say, given we're having a completely different conversation with something else, and that was naturally the approach of that interviewer was to throw loads of different questions in loads of different ways, just to see how we react. It was actually to do with more about some of the courses that we were doing, and it was something that really threw me, and something I've used myself, because actually it gets people thinking, and it shows that you're genuinely interested, because that was what it was all about, was being really interested in the person and who they are, what their makeup is in terms of what really drives them on. And it was a really interesting question. It was probably the more difficult one, because it definitely made me think for a minute, but really good question to have, and something I use now myself. Is there any other questions that we maybe have coming through? I think we've gone through quite a few there, and hopefully that's certainly setting people up for success. As mentioned earlier on in the whole process, just while we're waiting on maybe if there's any other questions, to give people a chance. Really what you need to be looking for in an interview process or ultimately what an interviewer is looking for, is, do you have the right skills, do you have the right experience, but most importantly, are you the right fit? Because the rest of it can be taught. You can build experience and you can develop the skills, but you can't develop a fit for the culture. So really that's what they're trying to test on. And I have seen a large percentage, and I've been involved in probably tens of thousands of interviews at this stage, or being privy to them in terms of the ins and outs and everything else. Ultimately what it's come down to most of the time is the fit, the engagement, I would suppose the initial relationship that's built in that interview process, and the emotional engagement more than anything, and that's more to do with culture. So when you feel an interview is really flowing, although you might not have all the skills or all the experience, or there might be someone more skilled or more experienced than you, but you've got a really good flow and you get on really well with the interviewers, and it's not just them, it's it's been throughout the process and feels really easy. That's because you're fit to the culture. That it's not just an accident that's happened, or something random. It's because that's a really good fit for you, based on your skill set, or based on your personality, and therefore it's an area that you'll really thrive in. Because if you get the culture right, the skills and experience can of course be taught, should I say, but the culture piece will help make sure that you are successful in that role, which ultimately adds more value to the business. Because if you're successful, the business is successful. Whether that's small or bigger, depending on the size of the role and what you do, doesn't make a difference. The fact is that you need to be successful in the role to help the business be successful. So it's really, really important that when you get that feeling, that that is because you are quite well aligned and everything else. So that's really what we're talking about when it's, are you the right culture fit? If things become really easy, and the types of questions you might ask, and you get a really good easy flowing relationship with somebody on a call, it becomes so much easier. Should we disclose personal situations like being a mom, for example, or anything else? It's a great question. There's nothing wrong with disclosing certain pieces. However, if you feel that becomes an issue, or you've seen it become an issue, or felt it being an issue, that's something personal that you need to decide upon whether you should or shouldn't include it. For me, I'm constantly telling people to put their best foot forward and always talk about who they are, what they do. I constantly talk about that I'm a father of 3. I will always say it, because at the same time, obviously a lot of the time we're working with corporate clients, so of course, it's more business meetings, and they need to understand me if I'm stepping into the organisation to help them and everything else, or working with candidates. But it gives them a snapshot into me, who I am, what motivates me and everything else. But also it manages expectations at times, that I'm not going to be available at 12 o'clock at night because I have a family as well. And it's not to say people who don't have families will be either, but it's more about managing what they understand, my personal life, and that there is something outside of work, and that I'm not afraid to bring that to the table. I encourage people to do that all the time. If you're massively into sport and it takes up a huge amount of your time in the evenings, because you play at a very high level, or not at all, just that's something that you're genuinely interested in. If you like going to golf or whatever it may be, and that's your headspace, going to the gym, whatever it is, you need to disclose these things, because you do need to manage expectations early in a very positive way, because all of them are positive, whether it's to do with sport, whether it's to do with even just walks, or just taking time out, whatever hobbies, etc. that you have. It is really important, because it does give them a snapshot into who you are, and again, that comes back to that culture piece. So for me, I would always say, when asked, should you disclose if you're a parent or not a parent, it's not, a lot of people won't ask that question, but should you want to disclose it, of course do so. If you feel that that's not something you want to talk about, then don't. There's no pressure either way, but I do think that you shouldn't. Again, it comes back to that culture fit, and if they're an organization that's more focused on everything being about the business and not having maybe a life outside the business, then it's probably not the right fit for you, because you have responsibilities outside the organization, and therefore you're not going to be able to get what you need from it. You're going to be feeling under pressure all the time, and ultimately they're not going to get what they're looking for. I don't agree with that type of approach, don't get me wrong, but ultimately it's about making sure that that's the right fit, and that you get all the right information. So really, really good question. But ultimately, again, it comes back to you putting your own personality across, and that's the most important thing. Who you are, what you do, and what you're about is of absolute value. It's just finding the right organization that fits with you, because if you're trying to fit with an organization's culture and it's not aligned to yourself, the values are not aligned to you, it's not how you work, then there is no point, because ultimately what's going to happen is either the interview process is not going to go the way that you want, or you're going to secure the job, which is great, but in 2, 3, 6 months time, 12 months time, and we see it's happened unfortunately for people for years, that they went into the job and didn't really see a way out of it after that. They've been in it and they've been unhappy. You can tell these things early on. If you can tell them in the interview process, the likelihood is that it's not going to get any better, because everyone's trying to put their best foot forward in the interview process, both the candidate and the employer. So if it's a case that you're not seeing good alignment in the interview process, then it's better to step back from it. What should I do if they invite me to an interview that I can't in that day or time? Okay, great question. It's okay to turn around and say you're busy. You'll do everything you can to make the interview, but it's just in a very nice way to go back and say, really appreciate, really looking forward to speaking with you. Unfortunately, I do have a prior engagement. I can't make that time. Could we? And then always suggest 2 or 3 other times. They might not take those other times, or they might not be available those other times, but the likelihood is they will come back. In most cases, I've yet to see it, especially in this climate in this day and age, that companies won't come back and say, we can't do those times, but actually we could do this time. Would this one work for you? And they're now giving you another suggestion. So the benefit behind that approach is it's showing that you're not just going to throw up problems. You're actually going to highlight that you're not afraid to speak up, number 1, which is great. Number 2, you're also then not just problem focused, your solution focused. So you're going to come back and say, I can't do that time, but actually I could do any of these times. Which would suit you best? If they come back and say, we can't do that, but we could do this, the likelihood is you'll find something that will fit. So it's okay to turn around and say, I'm not available at that specific time. There's no need to be afraid of that sort of stuff. There's no point being shy about highlighting, because if they don't give you an interview at that point, again, they're not aligned to you. And again, it comes back to, I know it's very easy to say, and especially when you're maybe banging your head against a brick wall and not having the success that you want. And if that is the case, can't stress enough, send through your contact details. We will be more than happy to share all the tips and tricks we talked about tonight, and much, much more in terms of our AC interview guide that we do walk through with our clients. It will give you so much information. But if you're at that point, you're banging your head against a brick wall, it's very, very easy for me to stand here and say, the company's probably not aligned to you. Don't walk away from it when you're trying to get a job. But I promise you, it will be so much harder if you take the wrong job and continue to just progress with it because you need a job, versus actually trying to take something. It doesn't always mean you're going to get the perfect job. It doesn't mean you're going to get the exact job you want. But what you should be always looking to do is take a step in the right direction, because if you get a job that is somewhere aligned to where you want to be long term, you're on the road. And the most important thing that people want to see when they're interviewing, and I see it all the time with people, is that people unfortunately have to take jobs at times, and I completely understand that, But the problem is they're so sporadic that you can't tell a track of what they really want. And the problem then is they seem confused. And when someone's confused, it means they don't know what they want. And therefore, the likelihood is you might not be able to retain them. And for a business to make back the money they invest on hiring new staff, they have to have them for at least 18 to 24 months. So in every interviewer's mind, they want to know, are you going to be here for the next 18 to 24 months? Because if I'm going to train you up as a permanent member of staff, I want to know that you're going to be here for at least 18 to 24 months so we can get our return on investment. That's the question you need to satisfy at all times. So it's so important that when you're in those situations, that if you can't find the perfect role or the right role, that you find a role that is aligned to that role and you can see a clear track. So if you're looking to work in marketing, you might start off looking at entry level in events or sales or something along those areas, because there is a simplistic track that will align to sales and marketing. It happens all the time. Events is a form of marketing, but it maybe not be digital marketing, or you might go into some other areas where it's, you know, online advertising or something along those lines. So there's multiple different things that you can do that is so important to make sure that there's some alignment to where you want to get to long term. Thanks for joining, Rana. Unfortunately, we're about to wrap up now in a moment, but if there's any questions around, we've talked an awful lot about our interviews, and this video will be available, as it always has been, after each of our chats. And of course, we'll be putting on our YouTube channel, so you can of course check it out there. There's so much more information on there as well around key insights on building the right CV, the right cover letter, how to set up your LinkedIn in the right way, included in all these chats, as well as the CV sins, as we call it. So the 5 CV sins and what we see on a daily basis that people are doing that is ruling them out of process. So you can check all that out on the YouTube as well, on our YouTube channel. Simply type in 5 CV sins, or most common CV sins, and we'll pop up straight away. Really, just to recap quickly for everybody, there is so many different stages to different interview process depending upon the organization, but typically you'll have at least 3: your screening call, or your first stage, or they can be one of the same, your second round, which is competency based, and your third round, which is typically your validation or your presentation point of view, which is essentially where you're basically finalizing the process. Typically, you want to do as much research as you possibly can. That doesn't just mean looking at the website, of course that's important, looking at the values, of course that's important, making sure you're aligned to them, so important, but also reaching out to people in the business and chatting to them, because they are really encouraged in this day and age to be chatting with people. And of course then, when you're in the interview process, making sure you do as much interview preparation as you can around your skill set, your experience, but most importantly, why you're a good fit for that job, why you're a great fit for that culture, and you understand the types of people you're going to be working with. So when you're speaking with whether it's a recruiter or a talent acquisition person, you make sure you know what the interview process is in advance, so you can plan how you're going to approach things. Thank you very much for tuning in again for another Career Chat series. We hope this has been as helpful as the others have. We've been getting huge feedback, so if there's any insights, any tips, any feedback that you want to share that we can help improve it, we'll help you get more from it, or just want to give us positive feedback, we're always very much appreciative. Again, really can't stress enough, if you are struggling to secure interviews, or struggling to get past the first stage, or struggling in any way, shape or form with the interview process, send us through your details in a private message. We will be more than happy to share our ACE interview guide, which is a huge piece of all of the work that we do with all of our clients, and how we're helping people secure their dream job in less than 6 weeks. So it's a phenomenal result that we get on a regular basis, and it's something that we can't talk highly enough about, because ultimately within 6 weeks we're seeing people go